Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namah Shivaya, and welcome to meditation today. Today, one of the things, because like yes, we're going to meditate, but I always like having this little bit of a moment to think about something that maybe is happening in the world, or maybe something I noticed that kind of triggered some thoughts in me. Recently, there's been a lot of going back and forth about like how to handle the conflicts that are going on right now, especially with the George Floyd murder, and uh, discussing like what is the role of spiritual activism, how that what that should look like, and how it should play out. Um, when we look at activism, especially in the last couple of centuries in American and around the world, there's always two dynamics that happen. There's always a dynamic of somebody who wants to be slightly moderate, who wants to kind of take the road of non-confrontational action. And then there is always someone who is saying that's not doing anything, and they want to take the road of direct action, confrontation. And then there's kind of people in the middle that it's just like how you think things are now in America, right? There's the far right, there's the far left, and there's all those in the middle. Same thing here. Progressive spiritual activism or social activism that has taken place, there's always been these two polar opposites at work at the same time within the same community, right? We're not talking about the right being conservative in a liberal movement, and then the left being, liberal and progressive in the most progressive sense. When we kind of even look at, like, let's go around the world. When Gandhi we know Gandhi, most of us, just because of how history has portrayed him. But he wasn't the only freedom fighter in India at that time that wanted to get the British out of India. He was on the more conservative side. He wanted peaceful engagement, but there were many radicals that were like, that wanted direct confrontation, because while they all worked together, they actually didn't agree with Gandhi's approach at all. In the early movements of African American independence, if we go back to the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, you had Booker T. Washington, who wanted a very kind of like thought-provoking interaction with whites. He wanted to not have any kind of confrontation. He wanted people to educate themselves, and then they would prove their value to white civilization and culture, and whites would open their doors. And then you had Du Bois and Gravy, who were like, Gravy was much more radical. Gravy was kind of like the forefather of Malcolm X and the Black Panther movement, who wanted, intense protest, direct language confrontation, and discussions of actually engaging with white America, saying this is what we want to achieve. And they fought, but at the same time they were working simultaneously. In reality, we have kind of when it comes to Booker T. Washington, we've kind of forgotten his contribution. We don't even think of him as somebody who was a civil activist. If we look at even recently, the movement for animal liberation, you had people like PETA, who in their beginning, when they first formed, was very radical in their approach to how to liberate animals. And then you had other people like Sierra Club and things like that were concerned about environment and animals, and they were like, oh, let's just write letters. So you have always these two concepts of how you approach activism tugging away at each other at the same time. And what happens is both sides like to say that their approach is totally right. Recently, I heard someone speak who a very wonderful spiritual teacher, but and they were talking about dealing with the crisis now, and there was a lot of language about, making sure that the ego doesn't get in the way, and that God is actually the guide in the action. And these are, it's a thought-provoking concept. And it is the teachings of yoga. But humans have a way of, we have a way because of our own minds, even great spiritual leaders, we have a way of kind of compartmentalizing things and not seeing the value of the totality, right? The huge thing altogether. But if we look at activism throughout history, it was never one movement or another part of the movement that made the change directly. It was a combination of both these extreme actions and these moderate actions. They both had to take place at the same time. They both because that's just the way energy works, right? You have it can't, you have to have time, to actually have kind of a elongation of that energy, and then you also have to have a rush of energy. Even if you kind of think about this as like, physical practice of asana, of yoga, which is a real tradition of yoga. You can achieve these spiritual concepts within physical yoga, like asana. In a yoga class, you have everything from like Surya Namaskaras, which are very like, they don't stop, there's a lot of energy being conducted, to coming into a Paschimottanasana where you stay in it longer, you fold forward, or even a Shavasana where you're passive. So within a class, pretty much no matter what discipline you're from, you experience everything from like this intensity to, a kind of inactiveness. And that is within the framework of the class. This is the same thing, which is what's happening now, and we're seeing one, masses of people becoming active and angry about something that has been going on for 400 years. the oppression of black and brown people with within America. And this is directed at America right now. We're talking about America. Um, Black and brown people have been oppressed all over the world, but this is the the match was struck in America recently. And then you're having a dialogue within America of people who are kind of calling for a restraint, a mindfulness, making sure of having the ego in check. Um, the problem with that restraint is if it's coming from somebody white, um, at this point with the intensity, even if that person has wonderful, great intentions, it can be seen as a suppression. Um, I actually have not heard African American leadership ask for restraint or kind of, a pulling back and kind of coming into a state of reflection before action. Um, I think what has happened is that people are aware that we're talking about uh, such a long period of time of actual slavery not existing, but Jim Crow laws existing that were basically slavery, and then the constant oppression socially, politically, economically, education-wise within the police force that is supposed to protect you. It's just gone on so long that at a certain time, the pressure cooker hits its boiling point, is what happens. Um, and a lot of times when you have spiritual teachers who take ahimsa to the point of non-action, and we have to remember that in its earliest understanding and interpretation, ahimsa was actually non-action, no action at all. Um, as the teachings of Krishna came about, that idea of inaction actually became, well, don't violate or harm, but you may have to take action, which is karma yoga, right? Um, Karma yoga is the yoga of action. So the situation, if we want to bring it back for those people who, because you're not African American or you're not a brown body, and you need to kind of, have something to relate it to, in the Mahabharata, Krishna's role in the first half of the Mahabharata, before he gives the discourse of the Bhagavad Gita, is is in the role of negotiator. He is trying to, trying to play Booker T. Washington. He's trying to create a conversation between the two families and to work out the conflict in a manner where everybody will be happy. He's that non-attached party of a negotiator. Um, Over time, even he realizes that it's not really working, right? That the idea that he will just keep approaching and kind of going back and forth and kind of asking for this and then being rejected and going back and asking if he realizes this negotiation process isn't working, and it leads up to actually the rape of the Pandava's wife in a public setting where she's disrobed, and Krishna steps in and he continues to put saris on her so that she isn't totally disrobed in public for, because she's about to be raped. So at that moment, Krishna actually gives up the role of nonpartisan negotiator. He actually picks a side, and at that point, he is on the side of the Pandavas. The 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 violation has been so horrific and so um, um, insulting that he actually makes a decision. But he takes one more step back, and he gives both families a chance to talk to him, and the Pandavas, the Kauravas, actually asked Krishna to support them with his army, his force, and his manpower, and the Pandavas asked for his guidance, right? So that's always a good spiritual teaching. There you come back to that, like, let the divine work through me. But even with, Kauravas picking weapons and manpower and Pandavas agreeing to having Krishna as advisor, there's still going to be a war. There's still going to be a legitimate war where bodies collide, where metal clashes, and blood is spilled and people die. Because here again, in that spiritual teaching, the pressure cooker has hit that boiling point. There's no way around it. And really, that is the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita too. A lot of times spiritual teachers will take that story, and especially because it's very much part of the yogic practice. It was like, the Bhagavad Gita is Gandhi's favorite spiritual text. We say things like, well, this is all a metaphor. And we do that in the West, in America, all the time, because people will ask you, like, why are we teaching a book that's about war when we're talking about ahimsa? And, it's kind of hard to answer honestly, which is, at some point you have to take action. That, like, it's your the last option you have. It's not your first option. And, that's how it works out. It's more complicated than just saying, oh, don't violate, don't harm, don't fight. At some point, the battle may have to happen. That the violations upon you have been layered up for so long that even God is telling you, fight. Calm your mind and fight, which is what Krishna says to Arjuna. And he says, if you don't fight, things are only going to get worse. This group of your cousins, this group of guys that you're fighting, they're out to destroy you. Fight. And so when we turn it into like, oh, the chariot is the mind and the horses are the senses and Krishna is there leading, and it's all a metaphor. No, you can't. There is some, that is true. The metaphor is there. But the idea that the Bhagavad Gita is set within a major text that is about the how India became India, how it becomes a country, the war is actually real. It's a real war. within the context of the book. Um, the Kauravas die, and and the karmic action of the war continues to play out for the second half of the Mahabharata. Um, in reality, we can. It's hard for us to actually know what God's plan is in the bigger picture. But but if you think about things, God never works in only one direction. God works in many different directions. So, while there may be elements that call for thoughtfulness and mindfulness and restraint and you know, questioning and re-questioning motivations, God may also be working through the side that says, take action. At this point, there's no other option on the table. We've negotiated and negotiated and negotiated. And we can't judge that, right? When we as teachers put ourselves in a position where we're judging, then we're like not really living up to the teachings. So my thoughts about this is know that, like, it was the kind of outrageous in-your-face actions of PETA that actually ended animal acts in circuses. It wasn't writing letters. It wasn't sitting around the campfire and singing Kumbaya. Know that, like, when we talk about the liberation of the first civil rights movement, it was a combination of, yes, Martin Luther King, but also Malcolm X. That there was both those things at work that took place. It would not have happened if it had all been King. It was also the fear that Malcolm X installed in the white ruling government that actually got them to be active and start setting things in motion. We're a long way away, but that's just the truth. We're a long way from the goal, but that was a combination of those two things. And India would not have been liberated if it had just been Gandhi walking out and picking up salt. We remember Gandhi over the other freedom fighters that fought. We know their stories less, but in reality, it was a combination of all those things. So that force that is there is in the practice, right? Like I said, even in these practices of yoga, there are times when it's incredibly active, and there's times when the energy subsides and becomes passive. Now is the time for active. This is. So picking your seat, set up tall. And meditation is important. This is the reason why meditation is important, is so that before you act, you've taken that time to sit with yourself, to reflect, to detach from the emotions that are real, that are there. That even Gandhi said, his anger is a tool for motivation for a higher purpose. He never eliminated anger. He said that. And that's a good point, that even a man of peaceful demonstration, of passive activism, admitted to having anger and using his anger to channel his energy. but he did it, he channeled that energy through meditation. Gandhi was a great meditator, so the idea of meditating allows you to sit down, detach from your thoughts, your feelings. Doesn't mean you get rid of them. It means you step away from them. You observe them. You analyze them. You but become the witness to them. Um, and allow your breath to deepen. Deep inhales. Deep exhales. Inhale deeply. Exhale deeply. And notice how, as you elongate and deepen the breath, the mind becomes calm. It may not cease, but it calms down a bit. You're able to observe the thoughts, the emotions. But the mind is a pretty uh, uh, tough uh, opponent that you have. You know, the mind works really hard to win. So as you inhale, using the mantra Om, inhale the sound of Om. As you exhale, exhale the sound of Om. Inhale the sound of Om. Exhale the sound of Om. Continue this deep inhaling of the sound of Om and exhaling the sound of Om. And as thoughts arise, as images come into the mind, and the mind wants to pull you down into a storyline, be the witness to it. Allow it to arise, allow it to fall, but don't attach yourself to it. Continue deep inhales. Deep exhales. Continue to hear the sound of Om. Continue to exhale the sound of Om. Silently tell yourself, I'm not this body. Silently tell yourself, I'm not this mind. Silently tell yourself, I'm not these thoughts. Silently tell yourself, I am not these emotions. You have a body, you have a mind, you have emotions, but they're all there to be the witness to be the spiritual activator, to be the activist in a spiritual manner. Inhale deeply for the sound of Om. Bringing the hands together in prayer and bowing the head slightly to meet the hands. Namaste. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I hope that there's there's some words that will give you some time to think about, like, if you've wherever you are in this time that we're in, where there's such intensity that and if you want to be a part of it, if you feel like you need to be a part of it, be a part of it, and find that space where you can have a voice and be an instrument of positive change.